I have a really interesting topic to talk about today. Something that majority of people do already know the story, at least one side of it. This is actually the story of the Titanic. So, as we all know, the Titanic was built, sent out on its maiden voyage. Jack and Rose, love story, blah blah blah, hits an iceberg, basically ends up sinking in the middle of the ocean, and a lot of people died. Right? Now, basically, the theory behind this is that there was two ships. There was the RMS Olympic and the RMS Titanic. Basically, both sister ships made almost around the same time and were virtually identical, almost exactly the same, except for a few key features. The portholes, if you actually were to look up pictures of both ships, you'll find on the Olympic that the Olympic had uneven portholes on the front of the ship. There were 16. On the Titanic, they were totally even, 14. When you look at pictures of the Titanic on its maiden voyage, it suddenly goes from 14 even portholes to 16 even portholes. The uneven portholes, as you can see in the pictures, are towards the back of that part. The other funny thing is actually the positioning that a lot of people find of the nameplate of the Titanic went from, if I'm not mistaken, the first T was pretty much almost right underneath the porthole, and then on its maiden voyage was somewhere in between. I can't remember, I might be mixing the two up, but it's one or the other. If you look at the pictures of when it was being built to when it was sent on its maiden voyage, the positioning of the letters actually changed somehow. Right? Now, what happened to the RMS Olympic was that it was sent out on its maiden voyage, got into an accident with another ship, and was pretty much so badly damaged that there was no point in fixing it. It would have just cost way too much money. So basically, this allows for the theory that the two ships were actually switched, the Olympic and the Olympic becoming the Titanic, sent out on its maiden voyage to ultimately be damaged so badly it would sink, and the White Star Lines, who was the creators of both ships, the owners, basically made a huge insurance claim on this. A few points to actually help prove this theory. One big one would actually be the propeller of the actual ship. Basically, the propeller on the RMS Olympic was very, very badly damaged and actually needed to be replaced. Now, at this point, the Titanic was already being built. So instead of putting one of the propellers, which had a stamp on it, 401, which I'll get to a little bit later on, was actually put on the RMS Olympic, right? Now, one thing that I'd like to point out is that when the Titanic went on its first maiden voyage, there was actually a science teacher. His name was Lawrence Beasley, if I'm not mistaken. He pointed out that the ship actually had a list to port, which basically almost, how to explain that is that the ship was almost kind of leaning to one side, right? It's almost like, imagine you're sitting in a car and one of the springs is broken and you're kind of like leaning to one side as you're driving along. It would kind of feel weird, especially on a brand new ship. Another thing is that both ships actually had linoleum tiled floors. Right before the Titanic was sent out on its maiden voyage, they actually had the floors totally covered in carpet. Reason why they say they did that is it's possible that because it was actually an old ship, being the RMS Olympic, instead of the Titanic, they wanted to cover up the used scuffed floors, so they carpeted them. There was basically no strenuous testing of the actual Titanic itself, which is kind of weird, right? I mean, you're putting a lot of people's lives in danger. You're sending them out into the middle of the ocean to go from one continent to another, and you're basically not even really going to test the ship? I don't know. That's weird, right? The ship was actually only half full. It's almost as if they didn't really want it filled to capacity. I believe the capacity number of the Titanic was about 3,000. There was only actually 1,500 on board, right? A lot of people at the last second, very famous, very well known, people with a lot of money, bankers, actually canceled their trip at the last second. One of them actually being J.P. Morgan. He claimed he was ill. But in actuality, a few days later, he was found in a hotel with his mistress. So, for what reason he canceled? Did he know? I don't know. There was the funny thing was actually right before, about an hour before the ship actually left port, um, JP Morgan had a lot of valuable stuff on board. What he did was he had them all removed off the ship for whatever reason. He wanted them transported from Ireland to the United States, I guess because he wasn't going to be on the ship. Maybe he took them off, or he knew something was going down. Now, there was another ship called the Californian. This ship actually left 5 days before the Titanic. It was carrying no passengers, only had wool and sweaters on board, which is already kind of weird, a little fishy, right? Now, what happened with the Californian? It basically sailed out. It ended up in the middle of an ice field, and for some reason, the captain decided he was going to stop the ship and settle there for the night. Now, he left the ship running through the night for whatever reason. And he also decided he was going to sleep in his captain's uniform and on the couch instead of actually being in his own cabin. Kind of fishy, kind of weird. It's almost as if he was there waiting for something to happen. I mean, come on, you have no passengers and you've got sweaters on board. For what reason? Now back to the Titanic. So you have a man called Captain Smith. Everybody remembers him from the movie with the full white beard, white hair, kind of almost looks like a trimmed up Santa Claus. He was Captain Smith. He was the captain of the ship, right? Now, Captain Smith, oddly enough, that night also did the same thing as the captain of the Californian, where he slept fully clothed in his captain's uniform and on the couch and not in his own cabin. Now, basically what happened that night, when they saw the iceberg, right? When they saw the iceberg, they claimed to have put the engines in full reverse and try and maneuver around the iceberg. Now, it was well-known knowledge that when you try and avoid an obstacle in a ship, especially one of that size, you don't put the ship in reverse. What happened when he put the ship in reverse? Imagine this is the iceberg, and this is the ship. What basically ended up happening was, instead of steering around it, like so, he actually put it into reverse and turned the ship sideways, which basically made it end up actually hitting the iceberg, when it was very well-known knowledge, and most very experienced captains, and Captain Smith would have been one of them, would know to actually just simply put keep the ship in at full power, and you'll basically just have more than enough time to guide all the way around the iceberg. Which, when they noticed the iceberg and the distance they were from the iceberg, they actually had way more than enough time to actually pull this off. Alright, now, the ship, the Titanic, as we know, probably was the RMS Olympic, had hit the iceberg and was slowly sinking into the water. Now, what happened when the Titanic was sinking was they were sending off rockets, blue, white, and red colored rockets, basically signaling that they were in distress and needed assistance, and hopefully somebody was nearby to help them out. There was actually one ship that was very, very close nearby, sitting empty with a bunch of sweaters on board, with no passengers. The Californian. The Californian was actually 12 miles away from where the Titanic actually sank. Now, what happened was the Californian was sitting in one spot, the Titanic sinking over here, and there was a small ship called the Samson, which was doing illegal seal hunting in the middle of the ice. And basically, supposedly, the Californian saw rockets, but they didn't see the right colors. And they also couldn't see the ship properly because the Samson was directly in between. The captain kept asking throughout the night, do you see blue, white, and red? Do you see blue, white, and red? And all his workers kept saying, no, we only see white. We only see white. So the Californian never actually ended up going to help out the Titanic, even though it's probably the reason why it was there to begin with was to actually go help the Titanic when it was in distress. Now, after the Titanic had already sank, White Star Lines was paid $12.5 million. Now, I don't know what that is in today's money, but, being over 100 years ago now, it was a lot. Like, probably a billion, maybe 2 billion. I don't know. I don't know what it would work out to. But it was actually a lot of money. And keep in mind, it only cost them $10 million to build the Titanic. Now, the funny thing about the insurance is that a few weeks before it was sent out on its maiden voyage, the insurance policies were actually increased to over $10 million. These are obviously a lot of facts that point to the fact that the two ships may have actually been switched, right? Just to simply make an insurance claim. Now, I don't think if this actually did happen and then the theory is actually true, I don't think they purposely meant to kill all these people. Obviously, they had the Californian standing by, but unfortunately, it just never reached the Titanic to help them out. Now, many years later, as we know in the beginning of the movie, the researchers went under the water, found the shipwreck, right? When these guys went under the water and actually found the shipwreck, they actually noticed a few weird things about the ship. For one, when they looked at the propeller, there's actually pictures of this. If you were to look up the propeller of the Titanic, it actually shows clearly a 0 and a 1. You can kind of make out the 4, so, I mean, the propeller was actually stamped 401, most likely. Now, keep in mind, the 401 propeller was supposed to be on the Olympic, not the Titanic. It was actually documented. The other thing is that the undercoat of the ship was seen to be gray. It was actually supposed to be black, I believe. The gray undercoat was only supposed to be on the Olympic. The Titanic was supposed to have a black undercoat. So that's one weird thing. Another thing is that over time, obviously, things underneath the water, they erode, they go bad, things start falling apart. The one thing that they did notice was that a few of the letters of the actual Titanic name that was riveted onto the ship was actually starting to fall off. Now, originally, when they built these ships, they actually had them engraved with either Olympic or Titanic. But ultimately, when the Titanic was sent out on its first voyage, all of a sudden it was riveted with the letters and the name being Titanic. Now, two of the letters had fallen off. I believe it was the T and the A, if I'm not mistaken. Underneath, you can clearly see two letters of M and P. So it's really interesting, and ultimately, at the end of the day, no one's ever really been blamed for any of this, right? A lot of people died. It's one of the biggest disasters in history. The only person who ever really got any shit for this was basically the captain of the Californian, right? And there was probably a lot more involved than anything. So at the end of the day, the interesting thing to think about is the fact that the Titanic never actually sank and went on and did a lot of runs back and forth, who knows, continents everywhere, and so on and so forth. Alright guys, so this is pretty much the end of my video. I hope you really enjoyed it. I find the topic, like I said, really interesting. I've been learning about it for years, and there's always new facts and new theories coming up about it. If you guys are interested in these types of stories, let me know in the comments, and we'll find more theories to talk about, and we'll go through. We'll see if they're plausible, if there's a chance that they could be true, just like this one, right? All right, thanks guys. I really appreciate it. Please like my video, subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff, and leave a comment in the section below. Thanks. Ciao.